Hey guys, what is up? This is Philbo, and we are looking at the Dark Plague Sorcerer build in Undecember. This build is going to have us casting Plague Spike as we attack our enemies. It is going to hit enemies, and a plague will burst on hit around the enemy with a chance to apply Plague, which decreases the enemy target's element resistance by 10%. We are then going to be activating to Dark Judgment, which summons areas of Judgment at random locations near where Plague Spike hits the enemy. These areas of Judgment can overlap on top of each other, damaging the enemy multiple times. So we are going to be looking to boost the area of effect for this skill as much as possible to maximize our chance of getting multiple areas of judgment on our opponents. And another thing about this skill is that it also dampens element resistance to our enemies on top of plague spikes. So between the two skills, we will be lowering our enemy's element resistance significantly. I think these two abilities combo together really nicely. And while the single target is not the absolute best on this build, it does a fantastic job of clearing. Another reason I really like these skills together is they pretty much share all of the same tags. They have the area of effect tag, projectile, they're both elements, and Dark Judgment is flexible in that it takes on the element of your highest element buff. So since we will be increasing our poison element, it is going to be applied as poison. Enough of the overview on this build. Let's go ahead and look at the details. Okay, so for our primary skill, we have Plague Spike here. Plague Spike, you will attack enemies, it hits them, and you will get this plague bursting around the enemy. You're then going to have a 25% chance of plague on burst plague, which dampens the element resistance by 10%. As we bring this to the legendary, our area of effect is going to grow a good bit, and then we will get a nice cast speed amplification. And for our awakening, while I think the top two awakenings are good for farming purposes, I think the overall best option here is Verity, as you get a big boost to your element damage amplification. However, you will not be able to use the element damage amplification rune, but that's okay because we have other great options. Moving on, we are going to look at Dark Judgment. Dark Judgment has 5 projectiles. When it gets cast, 5 areas of judgment will spawn. Again, these can overlap and do damage. The additional hits will be dampened by 10%. You'll also gain Dark Judgment for 10 seconds on hit. Dark Judgment can stack 10 times and you get a 10% damage amplification per Dark Judgment stack. Now, one thing about Dark Judgment is that the buff gets removed after you reach 10 stacks. It resets after 2 seconds. Now, don't worry about this other stuff here because Judgment of Light and Resource Outburst do not apply to this build. Those are when you mix Dark Judgment with other abilities. We do need to note that Dark Judgment buff gets removed on using any other skills other than Judgment, which includes Plague Burst. So we are not going to get the benefit of Dark Judgment. Moving on, we will also inflict stillness on the target for 1 second on hit. This stillness can stack up to 5 times and give good element resistance dampening to enemies it affects. Moving on to the awakenings, I think all 3 of these awakenings are very solid. However, 2 of them stand out as being slightly better in my opinion. The first one is going to give you more consistent hits because you're going to get an additional projectile, and this is the only way you can increase projectiles for Dark Judgment. You cannot increase projectiles with Multishot or through the Zodiac tree. So this is the only way. This will bring us up from 5 to 6 projectiles. This one is going to give us more consistent hits. However, the second one here, Origin, is going to make the projectile creation range a little bit smaller. So it's going to bring our Dark Judgment hits in a little bit. It's also going to give us a bigger area of effect for our areas of judgment, which gives us a better chance to overlap those judgments. So I like this one slightly more than this. This is going to create more consistent hits, I think, than this top one here. And this is still pretty decent area that it affects. Now, the third one I actually like just as much as Origin, if not more in certain situations. Now, what happens here is that Dark Judgment, remember we talked about that Dark Judgment passive that could stack up to 10 times and get 5% damage amplification per stack, but the buff gets removed anytime another skill is used. This makes it to where the effect cannot be removed upon different skill use, and it changes to 5 maximum Dark Judgment stacks. Once you're at 5 max Judgment stacks, you're going to get 25% damage amplification, but resets after 2 seconds, like we said earlier. So you won't have 25% amplification the full amount of time. If your cast speed is 4 or more, you'll probably average 20 or a little bit more than 20% amplification, but you also get this really nice resource cost dampening here, up to 15%. I really like that in this build because It does cost quite a bit of mana to run this build, so I think that this is a very strong option in addition to the Origin. And if you're going to choose one or the other, I would say if you're looking for more consistent and slightly more damage, Origin is the one I'd pick. If you want one that's still going to give you good damage and resource cost dampening, this is the one. So I awakened to Origin, but I'm honestly kind of wishing I would have gone to Verity. The last thing I'll say about Origin is that you are taking a little bit of a gamble. I got a max roll on this of 30%, and this did boost my damage by quite a bit, close to 30%. I don't think I would have gotten quite that increase if my area of effect was on the lower end, because overlapping judgments is what gives you the damage, and you will not overlap as much if you get a low roll on the area of effect. So take that into consideration when you're choosing between the two here. For our attack enhance, we are going to use release element to get element damage amplification and cast speed boost. If you are cast speed capped, marksman is the better option, since you will get projectile damage amplification and you'll get hit rate amplification and a pierce. Otherwise, I would stick with release element. Siphon Life is going to be our defense enhance. It's going to give us a big HP absorb, aka life leech. For movement, I use roll, and then I also use a secondary movement here in penetrating slash just to help me get around the field much quicker. Having the two skills makes it really nice and smooth. Finally, for my attack seal, I am going with Seal of Critical Chance. If you are close or at critical cap or at crit cap, then I would go for Seal of Condensed Elements, as it's going to give you more damage. For our links, we are going to be using Quick Cast. This is going to give us a big boost in our cast speed, which is going to allow us to cast way more Plague Spikes and Dark Judgment, since this is activated when we cast Plague Spike. So quick cast makes good sense to invest in early on. We're also going to use concentrated area damage for big damage amplification, but this will make our burst plague area of effect a little bit smaller, but the damage is well worth it. For farming, I'm going to suggest that you use parallel multi-shot and chain, and I'll explain why we don't use something like multi-shot and piercing. The reason is Plague Spike, when you look at it, has pretty thin projectiles. And when you multi-shot it, it spreads it out even further than parallel multi-shot. Unlike something like Fireball that will hit its target almost guaranteed, Plague Spike is going to miss targets sometimes. This is why I don't like piercing and I'd rather use chain. So check this out. If you shoot this just right, you can miss your target because, again, Plague Spike has very thin projectiles, and if you hit a mob and you're using piercing, you're not guaranteed to hit the enemies behind it. However, this is why I like to use chain, because chain will hit a mob and will bounce from one mob to the next. So you're pretty much guaranteed to hit all the enemies nearby. That's why parallel multi-shot and chain are used over multi-shot and piercing in this build. And when you're not farming and you are just looking to do boss damage like Void Rift boss or raid bosses, you could take these two off. I'd use poison penetration. Again, we can't use element damage amplification because we are going to be awakening to Verity and you can't link element damage amp, but some other good options here are going to be Find Weakness. If you're not crit capped, this is a very strong one to use. Also, Slaughter is nice if you have a very high crit rate, like over 80-85%. This one's going to do very strong damage. Also, I like Piercing. We talked about it earlier, but if you're bossing, Piercing is pretty solid. It can get to a very high amplification and projectile damage. This +1 Piercing will bring us up to 4 pierce counts, which gives us a total of 22% damage amp, plus another 5 here. Plus we get 30, 41.5, and then up to 70 here. So it's really big damage. This is a good one. We are also going to be using Deadly Poison on Plague Spike. This one you have to get, and you should be sharing this between your Plague Spike and Dark Judgment because it's going to give really, really big damage. The one thing you have to know about Deadly Poison, though, you do not want to run this unless you have Verity. We're going to need to inflict Venom because Deadly Poison relies on the enemy being affected by Venom. This is going to allow both Plague Spike and our Dark Judgment to inflict Venom since they are poison-based in this build, and that's going to give us a big boost to our amplification here, and then we get a damage multiplier against enemies affected, but don't run it unless you can awaken it to Verity. Now for Dark Judgment, again, use Deadly Poison like we just said. You're also going to want to use element damage amplification for the damage amp, strike damage amplification. Don't worry about the cast speed dampening because this is the activated spell, so it doesn't matter. Mana Storm to get a nice boost to damage here, albeit at a cost increase. Again, I mentioned earlier that this is a mana costly build, so if you're having struggles with mana, don't run this and run Poison Penetration instead, or Find Weakness like we talked about if you're not crit capped. Also a really good option. And Area effect is going to be the last room that we talk about. This one is also extremely important to this build because, again, we talked about how Dark Judgments, Area of Judgments, can overlap and do double damage. So as you're casting it, you're going to want these judgment circles to be as large as possible so that they can overlap. A lot of times we will put concentrated area damage onto area of effect skills to do additional damage and then take the area of effect dampening. In this case, that actually causes us to lower the damage of Dark Judgment significantly, while Area of Effect makes it do way more damage. So we got to have that one. Moving on, what we are going to want to do with our Zodiac stats is get enough intelligence to run Dark Judgment and Plague Spike. Then we want to get enough dexterity to get to the 200 mark eventually. Don't worry about dexterity early on. You don't have to put a point in here at all for this build, but at some point you'll want to get this up to 200 to take advantage of some of the points down here in Maggot, like this 30% projectile damage of dexterity and intelligence of 200 or more, and then this 40% node here where dex, strength, and int need to be 200 or more. Put everything else into strength, as this is going to give us a nice boost to our HP and our armor. In my opinion, that's more useful than what you get in dexterity and intelligence, at least early on. For our Zodiac traits, I'll show what I'm using currently. You don't have to follow this exactly. This is mostly just to give ideas, but you're going to want to focus on damage upon spell and cast speed. In tree 2, I'm going with the armor path because armor is really good up until you hit the armor cap to dampen damage from physical damage. I take 3 points here to get this 4% cast speed node. I'm also grabbing 5 points in here to get my mana potion effectiveness up. Really important in this build. Again, takes a lot of mana. Seed, you're going to take all these points here. Again, I'm taking armor to get my armor up. If armor's at cap, you can grab something else and just grab the resistance you need the most here. In tree 5, I'm grabbing these points. I like this 1% damage taken decrease. And then I like to get these 3 points here to get my cast speed up. If you're struggling with mana, these 2 points here are really good as well. For tree 6, I'm taking these points here, and I'm getting this cast speed and this spell crit damage. In Maggot, I am taking all of these points right here. I'm getting this area damage since both of our skills can benefit from area damage and projectile damage. Since both of our skills can benefit from area damage and projectile damage, I'm getting both of these, and I'm grabbing these 2 points in intelligence so I don't have to spend more points than I need to, and then I'm grabbing this one right here. Since both of our skills are area-based, I'm going all the way down and grabbing this area of effect. Really important for Dark Judgment. Again, we're trying to boost our Dark Judgment's area of effect as much as possible, so grab these here. And then again, for some more mana potion effectiveness, grab these 5 points if you're struggling with mana. I'm using a staff right now, so I'm grabbing the two-handed weapon tree, and these are the points I'm grabbing. If you're not using a staff and you're using something like daggers, you can grab either the one-handed specialization or the dual wield if you've got 2 daggers or 2 wands. I'm also grabbing these 5 points in farmer to get HP, these 5 points here in hunter to get to time of the hunt to get this damage amp, and then for our specialization here, I am grabbing all these points up here to get to this cast speed amplification. Then I'm coming down and getting the strike damage amplification and overpower. Now, if you are struggling with mana, you can take away these 2 points right here, the strike damage and the overpower, and grab convert mana. So essentially what convert mana is going to do is it's going to take some of your HP and turn it to mana. This helps out so much with mana, but it does come at the cost of some of your life. So if you do need to run this, then I would recommend running Harmony if you can get it up to the legendary level, because it's going to give HP absorb. So at the cost of HP to get additional mana back, you will get HP absorb from Harmony to offset the cost of the life needed for the mana. Harmony can be acquired through Rare Synthesis or the Pity Box. For our second specialization, we are going to go down here, grab this element damage amplification. We're also going to get knowledge, which gives us cast speed and damage upon spell or spell damage here. I'm also grabbing sharpness for the crit rate and crit damage, and then when I get my last point here, your last 2 points here, you're going to want to grab this area of effect and area damage amplification. Again, this is going to make our judgment areas larger, so this one is good, and then we'll get a nice amp to both of our skills since they're both area-based skills. Finally, for the third tree, I think it's good to go in here and grab all these points. You're going to want to grab this barrier absorb on hit, this element damage amplification, and then come down here and get this element damage amp for every 50 intelligence. And then also this cast speed amplification and resource cost dampening. If you're at cast speed cap, then take these points out, and I'd grab these points here because this path is also really nice. It gives us a nice area of effect boost to improve our Dark Judgment, while at the same time getting area damage amplification for both our skills. And then we get the 2 projectiles, which gives us even more plague spikes. However, until you get cast speed capped, this path right here is going to give us more damage. Now, I'm not going to be going into all the detail on gear stats, farm stats, and relic information, but I do want to mention that, again, since this is a mana intensive build, I think staff is a really nice option, at least at the budget level, because you will only have to work on 1 weapon, and you can get this implicit of resource cost dampening, 21%. Otherwise, you might want to go with daggers. Daggers are going to give you more damage, and you can pair a dagger with a shield, which is very, very good defense. That won't be quite as much damage as the staff, but highly defensive, and dual wielding daggers is going to give very high damage. Wands are also great. However, do note that wands you cannot use penetrating slash with. Put all the information on gear stats, charm blessings, and relic information is going to be down in the description, so check that out. But that is the Dark Plague Sorcerer build. What do you guys think? Let me know in the comments below if you've got any questions or if you have any other ways to improve the build. If the video has been helpful, do me a solid and give me a like and subscribe, as it helps me out a lot. But I've got to get back to the grind, so I'll catch you guys later.